Welcome here, everybody. My name is Andy Dell. I work with HeatMaster Furnaces. I'm the engineering manager. Today, we're going to be going over how to install the new HeatMaster EZLink control system into an existing furnace from 2021 all the way to 2024. So first, we're going to start by going over what you're actually going to get in the mail. So when you order the update kit from HeatMaster, you're going to get the EZLink control system and the new cover that comes with it. The entire electrical system is coming off of the box itself. If you pay attention to the control system itself, on the outside, it looks the exact same as the previous generation control system with the logo controller. The wires that are coming off of it are the same length, the same color, as well as the same connectors that you will be seeing on your current furnaces. So we're going to start in chunks here. So from the bottom of the control panel, you have your two actuator harnesses that come off. You have your bottom damper and your top damper wire, each of them labeled. I will go into more detail once we do the install. Coming off of the back of the control box, you have your oxygen wire with the oxygen sensor. A note to make for this new control system is it does have a new type of oxygen sensor. If you think back to a previous generation, the oxygen sensor came with its own oxygen sensor board. This system does not require a separate board for your oxygen sensor because it is integrated into the PCB itself. Therefore, it has a new sensor and it is not cross-compatible with the previous generation. Also coming off the back of the control box, you have your standard fan cord. On this side, you have a single piece of harness that comes off. This is going to include your alarm light. This is going to include your high limit DC wires, your high limit AC wires, as well as your bypass switch and your low water cutoff. Again, all the wires are separately labeled. Once you are doing the install, feel free to scan the QR code, as well as reference the wiring diagram in the manual itself. And there's also a decal on the back of the panel if you need to reference the install at any point. But with the labeling that's on the box, you should have everything that you need in order to install the control system. It'll go on just the same way the old one will come off of the sensors. Before we get started on this job, I'm just gonna go over the tools that you're gonna need to do the whole swap. I'm gonna start on my right-hand side of the cart here with a 5/16 socket. Mine's a impact bit. You're gonna need a number 2 Robertson bit. I have your standard impact, a drill with a number 11 bit. I got 2 of them. You're gonna need those to drill the rivets out. I got a 3/8 wrench, a 7/8 wrench. I got a flathead screwdriver, ideally a smaller tip for electrical screws. I have a stubby Phillips screwdriver, just for the sake of accessibility. If you can find a stubby, it'll make your life a lot easier. And then I just have a larger flathead in case I need to pry. And then I have a rivet gun and some copper anti-seize. If you have silver anti-seize, it'll do the job just fine. I also have a multimeter, just a simple Klein tools that you can find in your hardware store. Not that you will need it for the install, but always good to have on hand in case at any point you want to check your electrical connections. So we're going to get started on this. For reference, this is actually a G4000 that we're going to be using. It was built in 2023 of June. Not relevant. Like I said, this is going to work all the way going back to 2021 furnaces. The control systems that you are going to receive are all going to be a standard size, and they will work from a G4000 across to a G10000. Nothing that you're going to have to worry about or specify. A quick overview of what we're going to be doing today is we're going to start by disassembling the side of the furnace, take off the handles, the cover, pull the panels off. That way it'll give us access to the entire electrical harness inside of the boiler. We're going to move around to the back of the furnace and start unplugging the dampers, the fan, pull out the oxygen sensor, and then we'll come back around to your sensor box. We're going to unplug all the switches there. We're going to remove the old control box. Then we're going to install the new control box, hook the harness back up, run a quick electrical test just to make sure everything works, and then we're going to reassemble the furnace and it'll be good to go. All right, so we're going to hop right in. First thing I'm going to do is remove the handles. That's what we're going to need our 3/8 wrench for. Use the back of the wrench, That'll align with a 12-point star screw that's on here. For those of you that may be doing this on a 2021 furnace, back in those days, we used roll pins inside of the handles, which may require you to use a hammer and punch just to knock them out. So the reason that I'm using a wrench and not a 3/8 socket with an impact is because it is a 12-point head, and you need that back of the wrench in order to get a proper fit on there. This will not work if you use a regular socket. Throw everything to the side. All right, the next thing that I'm going to do is I will pull off these donuts. That'll just make it easier to remove the panel later on. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is actually remove these panels right away. So we're going to start by removing this panel first because it actually sits on top of this panel. This cover itself will come off with the panel. It's just screwed to a frame that's pre-installed, so we're not going to worry about that guy. And for that, I'm going to use my 5/16 socket. The control panel itself, with the door and the frame, that'll all nicely come off with the panel. This is a previously used furnace that went through quite a bit of R&D. So if you've taken your panels off a couple times, it's okay to sometimes have things like this happen to you. So I'm going to start just by pulling at the bottom of the panel. And looks like I do need to get that one out. So if this happens to you, you can peel back the bottom of the panel, put a little bit of pressure on it, and if the threads are caught inside of the framing inside, you pull on it, and it'll come loose just like that. Now, stay conscious as the panel itself, the only thing that's holding it in right now is a C-channel that runs along the top of the boiler. It's just seated in there and holding from friction. So if you wiggle it back and forth, it pops out just like that. I'm gonna throw that to the side. Now that we've removed the smaller panel, we're gonna move on to the large panel. And this larger panel will actually come out the exact same way as the first one. I'll start with the cladding screws down here. Just like that. Same thing, I'll start by grabbing the panel at the bottom, giving it a wiggle, and you'll have to pull it out. There you go, just like that. Throw that to the side, so we will need it later. All right. Now that we've removed the two panels, we have exposed most of the harness. So here you have your bypass linkage, you have your main section of the harness running to our sensor box. I'll throw this to the side, you will need this later again. So inside here, we have our high limit switch, we have our float switch, as well as our temperature sensor and our red alarm light. Obviously, before you start pulling any wires off of these sensors, make sure to disconnect your power supply or your furnace from the main power. I'm in the middle of a shop, so mine's not hooked up, but just make sure of that, as you're gonna have to take it all out anyway, so just cutting your main breaker won't work. All right, so we're gonna hop right into it. We're gonna start at the front of the furnace and work our way back. So I'm gonna start by unplugging the bullet connectors off of the alarm light. You can feel free to just start disconnecting, as I do. There is no specific way that these things need to come back together. And as I mentioned earlier, the harness itself is labeled. So when it comes to reconnecting this, it should be a breeze. So I've disconnected the red alarm light. I just pulled the 2 bullet connectors off of our bypass switch. As I do that, I'm gonna start pulling the wires back just to give myself a little bit of accessibility. Then up next, we have our temperature sensor. So the temperature sensor itself is actually siliconed into the thermal well. So just make sure you use your fingers to carefully pry back that silicone. This new system itself comes with a new temperature sensor. So in the case that you do damage the wires, that's okay. The reason that we're being careful is you do not want the wires to rip and the probe to get stuck inside of the thermal well. There you go. I gave it a little bit of pull on the wires itself after I dislodged the silicone, and it popped right out of the thermal well. So I'm gonna move that out of the way, and I'm gonna move on to the high limit switch. It's got 4 spade connectors, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. I'm just gonna pull those off as well, leaving the high limit switch still in place on the tank bracket. Just like that. I'm gonna pull everything back just to give myself some room. And the only thing that's left over here is gonna be the 2 bullet connectors coming off of the low water cutoff. I'm gonna disconnect those. And then I'm gonna start pulling the harness back. The harness is fed through framing and through rubber grommets that are pre-installed in the framing. The new control box does come with the grommets on the wires as well, just in case that you rip these. Now, when pulling the harness back out through these holes, you might have happen to you what just did to me, and the entire grommet might come out. That's okay, we can stick it back in there afterwards. It might just be easier as there is quite a few wires going through here. The second grommet actually just pulls straight up. It's a U-bracket, and that's it. We have disconnected the larger arm of the control harness, and we're gonna move our way to the back of the furnace to remove the top and the bottom actuator wires. So we've just finished disconnecting the wires on the side of the furnace. I've turned the furnace around just to give a better view of what I'm gonna be doing in the back. So we're gonna start with disconnecting the wires from the actuators. We're gonna go bottom actuator, top actuator. We're gonna move our way up into the fan, and then we're gonna remove the oxygen sensor and work our way to the control panel. That will be the last piece. If you're doing this on a furnace that is installed, this would be the time to disconnect the recirc pump as well as any supply pumps that you may have in your back cabinet. Give yourself a little bit of room. Not applicable if you're doing this to a new stove. So to get started, we are going to grab this stubby Phillips screwdriver that I mentioned earlier, and it'll make sense right away. So we're gonna disconnect the bottom part of the actuator. There is a screw that's right in the middle of this red piece that's at the bottom. You can get right in there, along your screwdriver. It is hand tight, so you'll be able to loosen it off. As you can imagine, if you would have had a longer Phillips screwdriver, it would have hit the bottom of the floor, and it's just a bit of a fight to get at it. So I took the screw out, make sure not to lose it. I'll set it to the side. And then this bottom portion of the actuator acts as a plug. So you just give it a slight wiggle and it pops off just like that. I'm gonna come over here and grab my flathead screwdriver right away. So you can start by removing the screws. Again, it's okay to just pull the wires off once we're gonna be installing the new harness. I'll explicitly mention what colors need to go into each terminal. So I'm just gonna start by backing off the screws. These screws are retained in the rail, so you can just back them off until they start spinning in place. They shouldn't pop out on you. Just like that. The wires will come out. So once you pull the wires out of the terminals, you can go ahead and pull the whole grommet nut out of the bottom as the new harness comes with it. You just spin it around, it's finger tight, and that's it. We have removed the bottom actuator. I'm gonna throw this to the side for now, as we will need it, and we will move on to the top actuator. Same thing, there is a Phillips screw in the middle of this bottom portion of the actuator. Pull it off, throw the screw to the side. Pull the bottom off. I'm gonna back off the terminal screws. Pull the wires out. Undo the grommet and throw it to the side. So that's it. That's all that there is to it with the bottom and the top actuator. Now we will move our way up to the fan. So the fan itself, you just pull the fan plug off, let it hang on the side, and you can go ahead right away and disconnect your oxygen sensor, let that hang down for now as well. The wires themselves are held in the U channels with 2 zip ties. So I'm gonna grab myself a pair of side cutters, and I'm actually gonna snip those off. 1. And 2. So you have one closer to the control box, and the second one is closer to the fan plug itself. Now I could feel that the wires are loose. I can go ahead and pull them out of the U channel. The oxygen sensor wire itself is fed through a grommet, just like we saw on the side of the furnace. So I'm gonna use my hand just to navigate the space, and I'm gonna pull it through the grommet, slowly feed it through. In the case that the grommet pops out, which just happened to me, that's okay. We got another one on the line, and that's it. So here's the oxygen harness. I'll let that hang loose. Now, the fan plug is a little bit challenging. If you have a 2021 and a 2022 furnace, I do believe that there's a tab that comes off of the framing that actually keeps that plug in place. For the sake of this 2023 furnace, it no longer has that tab. So just maybe stick your head up into the roof here. And if you take a look, you'll see a tab right on the side. Go ahead and use your flathead screwdriver just to pull that tab back. Otherwise, it'll be fighting you the whole time you're gonna be trying to pop the plug out. The fan plug itself is also fitted into the framing. Now, if you apply a little bit of pressure with your thumb, it should pop out. There you go. So now, same as the oxygen sensor, I can go ahead and just pull that cord out of the channel, and that's it. That's what that looks like there. So now that we've removed the oxygen sensor harness and the fan cord, we have disconnected the top actuator and the bottom actuator. We're gonna move on to the control box itself. So we just finished disconnecting the components on the rear of the furnace, and we're gonna work our way towards the control box itself. So the control box case is held on at 3 points on the furnace. We have a rivet that's located on the corner post itself. And then we have 2 more rivets that run along the top of the control box. The control box itself sits inside of this corner post. So we're gonna start by drilling out these 3 rivets, and then we'll be able to completely remove the control box. For this, I'm gonna use my number 11 drill bits. These are stainless steel rivets, so I would recommend at minimum using high-speed steel drill bits. If you have carbide, better. Now, number 11 is just about the right diameter, as the rivet holes themselves are 3/16 holes. So I will start by drilling out this one in the bottom, and then I will work my way up towards those two. If you align your drill bit right at the center where the stem was, so I have made my way through the rivet now. That's what the pop would have been. As I mentioned, these are stainless steel rivets, so they are quite hard. I like to go on a lower speed on the drill just so that I don't smoke out my bit too fast, and then I'll usually keep a medium pressure. If in the case that your bit slides off center, do try to make your way back towards the center of the rivet, otherwise it becomes very challenging to get it off. I've drilled the center out, so now I'm actually going to use my flathead screwdriver to pop the head of the rivet off. And you might find that this may take a couple of attempts. So there you have it. That bottom rivet is out now. I could feel the control box is loose inside of the corner post. Now I'm going to work my way up towards the two rivets that are sitting in the top of the framing. Now, this is a bit more challenging. It's just an awkward position to get into. You will be drilling them out from the back. That's where they have been inserted. Just to make it a little bit more comfortable for myself, I am a bit shorter. So I will grab myself a step stool. And then that way I'll be able to get right up into the top cavity, and you will see the two rivets sticking out just above the control box inside of the framing. So the same thing as we just did on this bottom one, you can go ahead and grab your drill and we will take those two out. So now that we've removed the rivet in the front, we're going to make our way to the back to get to the next two rivets. These last two rivets are right along the top of the control box itself. They are a little bit more challenging to get to as the roof framing will slightly interfere. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back to my impact with my 5/16 socket. And I'm going to pull these cladding screws off of the roof cap. This will allow me to raise the roof about an inch or two, just to give myself a little bit more access when I'm up there. Be conscious of the chimney as it is silicone to the roof. You don't want to rip that bead. If that does occur, cut the bead off, re-silicone it, it's not a big deal. I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to carefully lift the corner of the roof, and that pry bar that I had earlier, I'm actually going to insert it. That way the roof will stay up, and that'll allow me better access to the two rivets that are in the framing in the back. Same as the rivet in the front, I'm going to grab my drill, and to make it a little bit easier on myself as I am shorter, I'm going to throw a two-stepper back here to give myself a little bit of leverage. That way I can put some of my weight on the drill and hopefully get these rivets out quick. So for these rivets, since they're a little bit more challenging to see, it's that much more important that you hit the center right off the get-go. Otherwise, if that bit starts wandering around on you, it'll be really tough to keep it in place. Okay, so I can see that I've drilled through the top of the cap. So same as the first rivet. I'm gonna grab my flathead screwdriver, and I'm just going to pop that head off. So just like that, it's off. Now I can feel that the side of the control box is loose as well. And I'm gonna make my way to that last rivet that's right in the corner. That will be the most challenging rivet as it goes through the framing, and you do have the corner post slightly interfering. That's all right. So I'm actually gonna swap out for a fresh drill bit because I could see that I smoked it on this last rivet. Same thing, I'm gonna position my drill right on the center of that rivet, just to guide it here initially. Oh yeah. Okay, so now we've removed that third rivet. I can go ahead and set down my drill. I'm gonna pull out my flathead pry bar, and I'm just going to double check. If I give the box a little bit of a wiggle, I can feel that it's loose. I just gotta knock the rivet out of place, and then I'll be able to pull it out. So we're gonna move on to that last rivet here. I use the pry bar just to make sure that the first one was closest to the furnace popped out of its hole there. And then this last one that's up in the corner, if you lift the corner of the roof again, you'll actually see it. It's right here in front of you, and you'll be able to pop it out. Looks like I might have to do a little bit more drilling. There you go. All right, I've drilled out the last rivet. Lifting the corner of the roof, I can confirm that the rivet's out of place. Now, I'm gonna use my prying tool just to make sure it's all loose. Sometimes what can happen is the center shaft of the rivet will still you'll have a chunk of it get caught in the hole, and it'll just fight you on the way out. So I just like to make sure that it's all clear. Okay, hat's back on, got the rivets out. I can see that the only thing that's holding the control box in place right now is the spray foam. It's pretty loose. The last thing that I'm gonna do for the sake of convenience is I am gonna remove the crossbar. You're just gonna drill these two rivets out. That'll allow me to pull the crossbar off and then slide the control panel down to clear the elbows in the back, and then I can slowly turn it out of the way and we'll pull it out. So we're halfway done. Let's take this crossbar out and we'll get going. So just be careful so it doesn't happen to you what just happened to me. Stay conscious of the hanging control box. The chatter from the drill bit did have a drop, so it is resting on the crossbar right now. That's not a big deal. I'm still gonna go ahead and drill out this rivet, and then I will just disassemble it as I go. I've removed the two rivets on each end of the cross support. Now the bar is same thing as the control box. The only thing keeping it in place right now is the tension of the two corner posts and the spray foam. So now I will hold the control box up here, and then I will slowly turn one end down, and it should come out just like this. Now I am still holding up the control box with my thumb. It is not heavy, and then it'll slide out just like this. I got one zip tie here near the foot that was keeping the dampers in place, or the damper harness rather. So I'm gonna clip that. So that's it. So here we have the old logo control box. We're gonna throw that to the side, and then we will get on with the install of the new HeatMaster EZLink. All right, so we've completely removed the old control system. Logo is out of here. So we're gonna do the exact same sequence of steps, but in reverse. So I'm gonna start by grabbing the HeatMaster EZLink. We're gonna put it into place. I'll throw a rivet in there right away so that it holds up, and then we will go ahead and assemble everything. So here I have the new HeatMaster EZLink control system in my hand. As mentioned earlier, the control system does come with an oxygen sensor. So before we begin the install, I will remove it. It is a bit more of a delicate sensor. So it's okay to just set this down on the ground. I'm gonna hold it between my legs. It's an automotive style disconnect socket. So I'm just gonna pull the tab back and wiggle it free. I'm gonna set the sensor to the side for now, and we're gonna go ahead with the install. And the exact same way that we pulled out the old control system, I'm gonna reinsert this one into the corner post. Now, the first thing that you're gonna wanna do is this angle iron that's coming off of the side of the box. You're gonna wanna put that in there first and hook it around the inside of the corner post. That'll allow for the whole control box to slide back into position. I'm gonna be careful and move the fan cord and the oxygen sensor harness out of the way as it's at the back of the box. And I'm gonna go ahead and slide it back up to the top. There you go. I put it into place. I'm gonna make sure to realign all of the previous rivet holes so that I know it's where it needs to be. Just like that. So what you'll notice right away is the first hole that'll align will be this rivet down here that's right on the front of the corner post. That would have been the first rivet that we drilled out. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually just gonna reach over here, grab my rivet gun right away, and I'm gonna put that rivet into place just so that the box holds itself up. So there you go. Put that back in. There you go. So the control box is in place now. I can go ahead. I'm gonna throw the wires to the side for now, just so that they're out of my way. Go ahead and put this through the back cabinet so I don't trip over it. Make sure the wires are not around my feet. Now that the control box is in place and it's being held on by the rivet that I just inserted, I'm gonna go ahead and reinstall the crossbar. I'm gonna make sure that the holes that I drilled the rivets out of are clear. That way I don't have any shavings or rivet remnants fighting me on the way in. Another thing I will get ready is I'm gonna grab a couple of rivets and get my rivet gun ready so that once I align the holes of the crossbar with the corner posts, I can go ahead and pop it right in. Put those to the side. So now make sure when you're putting it in, it is in the right orientation. So the crossbars are with the bottom leg of the L down. So I'm gonna, same way that I took it out, I'm gonna put it back into the front corner post, and then I'm gonna move it up. You'll see a line in the spray foam from where the original position was. Make sure to realign them. Okay, I can see that the holes align with the corner posts right away. So I'm gonna go ahead and pop a rivet in the back. Do make sure that your rivet seats flush, as this is where the side panels are gonna need to sit again, just that way that you do have a nice flush side panels. Go ahead to the front. Same thing, rivet is back in place. So now we did reinsert the first rivet back into the control box. I'm gonna do one more rivet here at the top. I won't bother with the rivet that was in the far corner that was fighting us earlier. Having the one rivet up here and the one down here is gonna be sufficient enough to hold up the control box. So the same way that we drilled out the first one, I'm gonna go ahead and slightly pull up on the roof. That'll allow my rivet gun to clear. I'm gonna double check to make sure. So now here, I can see that I'm gonna have to just slightly adjust the channel that the side panels sit in, just to realign it with the rivet. So there you go. I have the rivet back in place. I can see that it's made its way through the control box frame. I'm gonna go ahead and rivet it into place. Put my rivet gun down. Everything is in place, and we can go ahead and start to reconnect the harness to the rest of the sensors. So now that the control box is installed, we're gonna make our way back to all of the electrical components, and the same way that we ended with the fan and the oxygen sensor, that's exactly where we're gonna start, and we're gonna work our way down the back cabinet and to the front of the furnace. We're gonna start by removing the oxygen sensor. So I'm gonna grab my 7/8 wrench. I'm gonna go ahead and remove the oxygen sensor. So I removed the oxygen sensor. I'm gonna throw it to the side, and I'm gonna grab the new oxygen sensor. Now be conscious, there is a strip of anti-seize pre-applied to the threads, just so you don't get your fingers in it like I did. It's the exact same thread. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna finger tighten it first, just to make sure that the threads fully catch. There you go, it's in. And then using the same wrench, I'm gonna go ahead and tighten the sensor down. So the sensor is tight. I felt a good amount of resistance, but not too much. You wouldn't want to strip the threads in your weld nut. The new oxygen sensor is now installed. And so now here we have our two harnesses. We have our fan cord as well as the oxygen sensor plug. So I'm gonna go ahead and route the oxygen sensor plug back into the channel. As I mentioned earlier, we have the grommets pre-installed on the new control box update. So I'm just gonna go ahead and slide that grommet back into place. Just like that. I can feel the cord is nicely seated back in the channel. The plug is in the right position. Now, before I reconnect the oxygen sensor, I'm just gonna reroute the fan plug up as well, just so that it's not in my way, just on top of the oxygen sensor, just like this. I'm not gonna fight the plug and try and reinsert it inside of the framing cutout, just because there's not as much room from the bottom, and we will zip tie everything into place and it'll sit securely, just like when it was in the socket. Now I can go ahead and I can pull out the plug, pop it on. So now we have reconnected the oxygen sensor. It is a directional plug, so there's only one way you can put it on. So if you can't quite get the rails to align the first time, go ahead and just give it a flip and it should go on. I'm gonna go ahead and reconnect the fan as well. There you go. I'm just gonna leave the wires up here loosely before I zip tie everything down and I do put the panels back on. I'm gonna run a full electrical test. In the case that I haven't connected a component properly, it'll be much easier to troubleshoot as everything is still accessible. So now I'm gonna move on to the damper actuators. I'm gonna start with the top actuator. Let's grab one of the plugs that we put down earlier. If you have the two on top of each other, it doesn't matter which one you grab for the top or bottom. It is a universal plug. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull these harnesses out, and I will grab the harness that says top damper. I'm gonna untangle them. So I can see this one is labeled top damper. I'm gonna insert the plastic grommet nut back through the bottom of the plug. I'm gonna go ahead, tighten that down. Just like that. I'm not gonna fully tighten the nut down, just so that I have a little bit of movement of the wires as I get them realigned with the contacts. Be careful, this wire loom does pop out of the nut if it isn't tightened down a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and pop these ends off that came pre-stripped. I'm gonna go and grab my flathead screwdriver that we used for disconnecting the wires previously. I'm gonna completely back all the terminal screws off. Like I mentioned earlier, they are preset. They should still be out, but I'm just gonna make sure before I put them in. So I'm gonna go ahead and reinsert the wires into each terminal. I'm just gonna move them out of the way so I could show you. Each of the terminal contacts are labeled with a number right above the opening from 1 to 5. If you reference our wiring diagram for our 2025 units, each of the wire colors do reference this exact number. So it'll be an exact matchup between the wiring diagram and the actual contact terminal. We always have our traditional red wire being the power, our yellow wire is the common, and the blue wire is our signal wire. You can also reference the front of the actuator does call out what number terminal is the power, the common, as well as the signal in, if you don't have a wiring diagram accessible to you immediately. So now I'm gonna go ahead. I'm going to insert the red wire into terminal 1. That's our 24 volt DC. I'm gonna tighten the screw down firmly, give the wire a slight tug just to make sure that it's in there. I'm gonna insert the yellow wire, which is our common, into terminal 2. And I'm gonna reinsert the blue signal wire into terminal 3. I'm gonna check those one more time, giving them a slight tug. They are firmly in place. I'm gonna back the grommet nut off a little bit. That'll allow me to push this excess wire down into the loom. So when I put the cap back onto the actuator, I'm not gonna have these wires fighting me in the way. I've tightened the grommet nut down so that it holds the loom into place. I'm gonna put the cap back onto the actuator, making sure that the grommet and the harness is on the right-hand side of the actuator. That way I know that the contacts will go into the right position. Also, if you look underneath the actuator, you will see that the contact pins are on this side that'll need to be inserted into here. So I'm going to pop that back into place. You should be able to give it a firm push, and then it holds itself back into place. If you're having trouble putting it on or you're fighting it, there could be a potential wire that's in the way. So it is better to just pop it back off, take a look, and reinsert it. I'm going to grab my stubby Phillips screwdriver, put it back on the screw, align it, and then I will tighten it down. So the bottom of the actuator is back on. I'm going to tuck the wires into the back cabinet, and we will do the exact same thing with the bottom actuator. If you do have a little bit of excess wire and you're having to tuck it into the cover, ensure that it is free of the screw that does fasten it to the actuator. If one of the wires is over this center hole, there is a possibility that once you reinsert that screw, you can damage the wires and possibly cause a short or a bad signal. Ideally, if you have too much wire or if you're struggling to fit it well into place, just loosen off the nut and completely pull it out. That way you can readjust the loom and give yourself a little bit more to work with, but at least then you don't have to worry about stripping the wires. So now that we have the two actuators connected back up, the fan's plugged in, the sensor's plugged in, we're going to move our way to the side of the furnace to get the remainder of the sensors that are up in the top, and then we're good to go. I've turned the furnace around again to have a better view of what I'll be doing on the side. So same thing, we're going to start at this end and work our way back towards the control. So the first thing that I'm going to do, the same way that we pulled the previous harness out of its holding brackets, I'm going to go ahead and reinsert the grommets back into the tank bracket so it holds the first section of the harness into place. Now for the second one, in order to get this wire bundle through the whole of the framing bracket, I'm going to actually insert these one by one, being careful not to damage the wire sheathing. Just like that. It'll be a bit more of a struggle if you try to insert them all at once. And just like that. Now I'm going to pull these through all of the way. Go ahead, reinsert the grommet back into place. Just like that. So now my wire harness is back into place, and I'm going to start plugging everything back in sequentially. I'm going to start with the low water cutoff. So I'm going to look along my harness, and I will find the wires that are labeled low water cutoff. In my case, the tape doesn't bother me too much, so I'm just going to leave it on. Feel free to rip it off. I'm going to go ahead and reconnect the bullet connectors. The next thing that we will reconnect is going to be the high limit switch. With the high limit switch, you will notice that we have two sets of wires. We have two reds and two blacks, and they're going to be labeled high limit DC for the red wires and high limit AC for the black wires. Connect the high limit AC black wires on the two black or the two back terminal spades. Feel free to pull out the high limit switch if it is easier for you. You can reconnect the wires and then put the high limit switch back into place. Just make sure that it is up tight against the tank so that way it gets good readings. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab the high limit DC red wires, and I will put them on the terminals that are at the front of the high limit switch. Now it is critical that you wire these with the light colors across from each other. Do not wire them with the two black wires on the top and the two red wires on the bottom, as it will short out. The colors have to be across from each other. So I've wired up the high limit switch. I will now move on to the bypass switch. Same thing, I'm going to find the wires that are labeled bypass switch, plug those in. Now I have the temperature sensor that's left. The one thing that I will do is I'm not going to put silicone on this as the original sensor was inserted. I'm going to grab my copper anti-seize, and I'm just going to take a dab of that out. Put a little bit right on the end of the sensor, just like that. Get a nice even coating around it. I'm going to reinsert the temperature sensor back into the thermal well. Now what the anti-seize does, it creates a vacuum that'll actually, if you give it a slight tug, you will feel that it pulls the sensor back into the thermal well. Now, if you find that it's still easily removable, go ahead and pull it out and put a little bit more anti-seize on. So that's good to go. All that's left to reconnect is the red alarm light. Now it is critical to reconnect the red alarm light into the correct contacts as there is polarity. So I'm going to go ahead and connect the red wire, which is our 24 volt DC, to the black wire on the LED. And I'm going to connect the yellow common wire to the white wire on the LED. So that's it. All the sensors are back up and connected. All that I'm going to do is a little bit of wire management. I'm going to pull some of this excess harness back and out of the way. I'm going to help it along, not to completely pull it out. It is okay if you have a little bit of harness hanging at the back of the unit, especially for the G4000s. As long as you don't have any loose wires near the bypass mechanism, as there is a probability of it catching if it's in this area. So now that I've pulled the main harness back, I'm going to take these wires and I'm going to neatly tuck them back into the sensor box. Make sure that none of the plugs come undone, and it should be okay just like this. I'm going to shove them back in. Go ahead and get the alarm light out of the way. Let it hang down. So now I'm going to go and grab that piece of ceramic blanket that I pulled out earlier, and I'm going to put it back into place. I have it on the side here. So now I can nicely tuck that back into place, just like that. And that's it. The new control box, your HeatMaster EZLink system, is installed and in place. Before we reassemble everything, tighten down the wires and put the side panels on, I'm going to throw power to this control box. I'm going to quickly run through an electrical test, make sure that all the components are functioning properly. And then once I'm able to confirm that, we will put the furnace back together. I'm going to run a quick electrical test on the unit. In order to do that, I have to throw power to the control system. Now I do have a homemade cord here where I have alligator clips just on the end of it with a 120 AC socket on the other end. I'm going to go ahead and just throw those gator clips on here. Just like that. Before I plug anything in and I throw power to the unit, I am going to make sure that all of the switches, especially the main switch in the back, is in its off position. Now I can go ahead and power up the unit, just like that. Turn on the main power. And I should be able to turn the control system on. I can see the loading screen starting up. When the program initially fires up, you will notice that you do have a low water alarm. That's absolutely normal on a new unit because there's no water inside of the tank. So all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna remove this piece of ceramic again, and I'm gonna go ahead, find the low water cutoff switch, and I'm just gonna bypass it in order to clear the low water alarm. You will hear a click. You can see that the notification has cleared. So I'm going to go ahead and clear the alarm. And this will allow me to cold start the furnace. Cold starting the furnace allows me to hear the fan operating. So now I know that the fan is running. I'm going to pay attention to my oxygen level to ensure that the oxygen sensor is working properly. I can see that it's reading 20.7, which is perfect. The temperature is reading 51.4 degrees Fahrenheit. That's our ambient temperature inside of the shop. So I can see that the temperature sensor is working correctly. one last thing for us to try is I'm gonna pick up one of these handles out of frame. I'm gonna throw a handle onto here, and I will check the bypass just to ensure that our bypass switch is working correctly. I've opened it up. I get a notification saying the bypass switch has been activated, so I know that the bypass switch is correctly hooked up. Go ahead, close that back up. I can remove my handle. And that's it. I'm safe to power off the control system. I've checked all of the components. I'm gonna go ahead and unplug my unit, throw the extension cord to the side. I can take off my alligator clips. I can go ahead and reconnect the low water cutoff, just like that. I'm gonna insert the wires back into the box. I'm gonna grab my piece of ceramic blanket, snugly fit it back into place. Now we're good to reinstall the side panels, throw zip ties on our 2 pieces of wire harness up top, and the furnace is ready to go. I'm gonna go ahead now and reinstall all of the panels. I'm gonna grab our larger panel, start with that one first as it needs to sit underneath the smaller panel. I'm gonna realign the bypass shaft as well as the shaker shaft, insert the panel back up into the U channel, grab it by the bottom, insert it back into place. Make sure that the old bolt holes or screw holes are aligned. I'm gonna grab my cladding screws. Just a note, the shorter cladding screws run along the bottom of the unit, and the longer cladding screws run along the center of the side panels into the crossbar. I'm gonna grab the smaller side panel, and before I install it, I'm actually going to grab my impact. I'm gonna insert my number 2 Robertson bit. And if you open up the door, we're gonna remove this old faceplate so that we can later reinstall with our new faceplate. I'm gonna undo these machine screws. Set that down. Oh, there you go. I'm gonna pull that out. Pick up my screw. I'm gonna set this to the side for now. Make sure not to lose those screws as you will need them when you reinstall. I will now grab my 5/16 socket bit and reinstall the small panel. I'm gonna try to get this small guy out. Yeah, there you go. So now that we've removed that faceplate, this door is loose because the magnet that was holding it in place is gone, or the elevator bolt rather. So I'm just gonna put it back into place while holding the door shut with my thumb, so it doesn't swing back out at you and hit you in the forehead. Same thing, I'm gonna place the top of the panel back into that C channel. Remove the panel into place. Just like that. I'm gonna make sure that the holes all realign. Just like that. Put this long guy back in. just like that. I'm gonna grab my Robertson bit, put it back into my impact. I'm gonna grab our new faceplate. Put that back into place. Hold it up by the elevator bolt and carefully thread the machine screws back in. There's no need to over tighten these screws. There's no load on them. They just hold the faceplate in place. So all I'm gonna do now that it's in place, I'm gonna slightly back the screws off just to ensure that the faceplate is aligned and flush to the screen mount. I'm gonna push the middle of it in just so that it doesn't bow, and then I will bolt it back into place, just like that. I will make sure that you can see the elevator bolt needs to be in place. If it's not far enough, the magnet won't catch on the door. I'm gonna adjust it so I could feel the door grabbing. I could firmly pull on it and the door doesn't want to come off. And I could feel with my fingers that the door is getting a good seal on the frame. Another way to do this is to put the magnet all the way in until the door doesn't catch anymore, and then slowly back it out about one turn at a time until the door catches, and that'll give the perfect amount of sealing on the control box door. So now that I've sealed up the side of the unit, I'm gonna go ahead and make my way back. We have 4 more cladding screws to reinsert along the top of the rear roof cap, as well as throw some zip ties on our oxygen wire and our fan cord, and that'll be it. We'll put the cleaning tools into the back of the unit, seal it up, and it'll be ready for customer. I'm gonna reinsert the cladding screws. I'm gonna tuck the fan cord back up into the channel, make sure that it's seated. I'm gonna push the oxygen wire out of the way. Before I finish, I'm just gonna go grab 2 zip ties. I'm gonna zip tie these 2 cords back into place. So if you look up here, you will see that there are holes in the framing that you can insert the zip ties through. Wrap your zip tie around the cords and you'll be able to tighten them down just so that they stay in place. I'm gonna move these wires down and out of the way, just like this, just so they're tucked behind the unit. So you got a little bit of extra room. Make sure they're not in the way when the customer will be installing lines and pumps, just like that. Make sure you seal up your power supply. Make sure you put the cap back on where the main power is. So that's it. We've tidied up the rest of the wires in the back. I'm gonna put the tools back into the cabinet. I'm gonna zip tie the door shut, and that'll be it. You now have a new HeatMaster EZLink control system in your furnace. That's all that there is to it, to the retrofit kit. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and we will be more than glad to help. Thank you.